Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Been a week. It's been a week, and let me tell you. So this is the chapter 2 lecture, and this week is probably one of the more important weeks because it talks a lot about ethics and liability and also how we release information. So I really feel like this is super important for people to know and understand. So I'm just going to breeze through chapter 2 really quick and highlight the most important things. So if you're looking at the chapter 2 PowerPoint, I'm going to go straight to slide 3. It talks about, an idea about what moral is. So a moral is basically what you feel to be is right. A lot of people refer to their like moral compass, like the things that kind of guide them along the way. Um, and usually we feel this kind of like guilt when we're going against something that we feel morally obligated to. So there's that. But the other thing is also ethics. Now, ethics relies on a specific code, and every profession, for the most part, has its own specific code of ethics that it follows. So, social workers have their own code of ethics, physicians have their own code of ethics. Us as chemical dependency professionals have our own code of ethics. I'm sorry, my nose is so itchy. I'm like, I apologize. So when it comes to your LADAC has its own set of ethics. And if anything were to happen where you had a suit filed against you or someone challenged your license, your what they reference in deposition is the code of ethics. Is this something that you are bound to? Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm like off the hook. All right, so in terms of what is legal, it really depends on what the offense is. It depends on the manner in which it happens. It depends on the license that you have, and can there be overlaps in terms of moral and ethical? Yeah, absolutely. There are some clinicians that practice on a religious basis. So they refer to themselves as a Christian counselor, or they refer to themselves as maybe more like a spiritual based person or something. I don't know. Everyone kind of practices a little bit differently, but you have to be really careful because some really kind of go on that line. Um, Even now too with something that we call dual boundaries. That's a new thing that's actually recently come up in the last couple of years. I did a training on it like 2 years ago. So dual boundaries basically means that um, you if if I meet with a client and that client I've never met before, I've never seen before, it's from someone completely fresh, my boundary is that of a clinician. If that client comes in and it is someone I know from my past, perhaps someone I went to school with, a family member, an old friend, by the way, all of those I have experienced personally in treatment. You have a new boundary. So it's the boundary of therapist to clinician, but also boundary you know, um, from therapist to a personal relationship linking it. We're seeing a lot of that, especially in reference to people who are in recovery. So some organizations encourage, excuse me, and advocate for you to talk about, your experience with addiction recovery if you're so in it. And then other agencies say, no, no personal information being distributed whatsoever. So that makes it really challenging sometimes, because we're in this weird limbo right now of figuring out what can and cannot be excuse me, what can and cannot be um, disseminated in terms of personal information. Some people are more free with it. Some are kind of old school social workers where they're just like, no, boom, hard boundary, no information, no exposure, no nothing. So that's where it becomes a little tricky. And in the next slide, in number 7, that's kind of what it talks about it a little bit more. So you have to be really, really careful. If you can avoid dual relationships, obviously you do that. But the reality too is that some you might not be able to. For example, I might not have someone, let's say I'm familiar with my past as my client, but if I'm running an IOP group and that was their recommendation to do that group, I may have them in that in that room. Now, what we would do is we would have a conversation with them and say, hey, this group runs 5 days a week. If you want, you can just do the 4 days that I don't teach it, and just the one that, that I teach you don't do, or something. For the most part, people are actually really chill about it. But it really varies too on the experience. Okay. Gifts from clients. You're not supposed to accept any gifts from clients whatsoever. If a gift is given to an agency, so for example, we've had people bring us brownies. We've had people give us like an edible arrangement saying, thank you for all of your help. I really appreciate da. If it's given to the office and if it's under $50, it can be accepted. If it's giving to you personally, so for example, I had a guy that I was working with, and it was like an EAP thing, and I was pregnant at that time, and we were ready to discharge him, and he said, oh, I feel really bad. I wanted to get you a gift for helping me. I wanted to get you, like a gift certificate to go get a pedicure because you're pregnant. I'm sure your feet hurt or whatever. It was a kind gesture. It was a creepy gesture, but I'm glad he forgot it, because I wasn't going to accept it. And then there was another time where I had a cute little Portuguese woman who saw that I was pregnant, and, and knew that I was having a girl, because I shared that. It's like, people are going to ask, and it's like, whatever, I don't care. And she actually worked at like a retail, like a Walmart or Target or something, and bought me a little dress for my daughter. Thankfully, it wasn't the prettiest thing in the world. So I showed my boss, because that's what you do. You always show your supervisor, say, hey, this person gave me this. I accepted that gift because culturally, because she was a cute little Portuguese woman and I know the culture, culturally, I know that if you refused that gift, it would have been incredibly insulting. I knew that it wasn't given in a romantic way. It wasn't given in a malicious way, and it wasn't given necessarily in an inappropriate way. This is just something that's really common in our culture. So I actually ended up donating it to, I sent it actually to Portugal. My mother made a huge barrel. I threw it in there. So that was helpful. So if you ever accept something from someone, you absolutely positively have to let somebody know, your supervisor, and some cases you may have to document as well. All right. So be really careful about that, especially the creepy ones. Okay. So document, I just mentioned that. Number 10, sexual and romantic relationships. For the love of God, don't do it. Okay. Here's the motto. Once a client, always a client. All right. Even if it is 5 years down the line and you have a client that has been sober for 5 years and they're doing great and they're single and you're single and you have a sexual attraction to each other, you can't do it. Once a client, always a client. It's the same thing when it comes to a friend level. You can't decide to go to Disney on Ice with a client that you had 5 years ago because your children happen to be in the same kindergarten class together. You can't do it. You cannot do it. It is a boundary issue. And heaven forbid something happen and that person gets mad at you and decides to write a very negative letter to your licensing board, and now you have to respond to that. So just don't do it. It's not worth it. And they will understand, especially if you say, listen, once a client, always a client. Unfortunately, in this field, we can't have these kind of relationships. There's 79 billion people in the world or something like that. You can go without that one relationship. All right. Which does happen. I've seen clients in the supermarket. I've seen clients who I have mutual friends with. I have clients who I've seen at my daughter's school, and I live in Dartmouth and I'm from New Bedford and I'm all over the place. So it's not like I'm in Little Compton and I just so happen to see all these people in this little tiny town, So who is always responsible? Well, it's the case manager, the clinician's job to make sure that no relationship ever happens whatsoever. And if a client ever makes any kind of advances or inappropriate comments towards you, then that's something you really need to address. So one day I was getting out of my car and, everyone was smoking outside, all the clients. And, one of the girls that was over there was like, "Oh, hey, sexy, how you doing?" It wasn't a sexual remark. It wasn't her hitting on me. It wasn't her trying to embarrass me, but it was inappropriate. So I have to say something, be like, that's not appropriate for you to say that to me. And she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry." And I said, "That's okay." I was like, we live and we learn and we move it along. There's been, when I was working in a prison, there was an inmate come up to me and said, "Oh, hey, so-and-so needs a marker for the whiteboard. Do you have one?" I said, "Sure." So I go to hand one to him. And as he went to get it, he grazed my hand. It seems really insignificant, but that was an inappropriate contact. He didn't have to graze my hand. I have to address that. Clients touching you, don't touch me. I don't like to be touched. It's not my favorite. And it's inappropriate because it's kind of opening the door to allow them to think that they can cross a boundary that other people aren't allowed to. Okay. So you as a clinician or as the case manager are the one that has to set the boundary, that has to set it. Okay. Avoiding value conflicts. Just be mindful that there are people out there that are going to have very strong opinions about you, about your work, about the field, about addiction, about a lot of different things. And sometimes they may say things to rile you up. For example, I met with someone who was like full-blown America, like Trump shirt, POW, MIA hat, American Eagle tattooed on his arm kind of a thing. And he was trying to rile me up by referring me as a bleeding heart liberal. And, my response to that was, if that was who I am, would that bother you? Would that upset you? Do you think that is who I am? How does that affect your treatment? So you can use that as a therapeutic tool, but if you feel like someone's just probing and just essentially being a jerk, then you can just shut that down really quick and say, I'm not here to talk about me. I'm here to talk about you and your issues, and this is where we have to go with it. And if you're not for that, then we can end the conversation. Okay. So self-determination basically means that you're giving the client the right and the opportunity to know what's going on with their diagnosis, to know what's going on with their treatment, and to really be able to explain to them, this is what you're diagnosed with, this is what's going on, you have the right to make whatever decisions that you may need to. Excuse me. Informed consent. We're going to get into that into chapter 19, so I'm going to breeze over that really quick. Okay, so what constitutes as informed consent? So it's capacity, which means the client's ability to really truly understand and make a competent decision. Comprehension of the information, like do they really understand their rights? Do they really understand what it means to sign a release of information or how information is distributed and when? And voluntariness, which basically means does the client feel that they are freely making this decision, or are they feeling coerced into it, or feeling pressure? And it's important for our clients to know that regardless of the reason that they come in for treatment, that their rights are protected, and I'm going to get into that in the next one. Okay, confidentiality. So I'm going to get into this in the second one as well, referring to rights. So everything is confidential with our clients. You cannot give out anything without their permission or their consent unless some pretty dire circumstances happens. Okay, so the minimum necessary rule. So even if you have a release for full disclosure, which basically means you can give out whatever information you want to the person designated on the release, you still should only give out the minimum information that they need to know. So if a client comes to me with DCF involvement, I'm not going to call their DCF worker and be like, oh my God, he's got daddy issues. No, it should be more like, hey, here's where they came, when they came. This was the recommendation for treatment. Here's the dates that they came. Here are the days that they've been absent. Here's their progress in treatment. Here are the urine screen breathalyzer results. These are my recommendations moving forward. Sometimes if there's information specific to a case, so for example, if a client is in there because they had a drunken domestic issue with their significant other and now DCF is involved. So they might say, hey, what's your take on the relationship? What's their insight on the relationship with their significant other? Is there something that we should be concerned about, et cetera, et cetera. So because the relationship is tied to the substance abuse and tied to the DCF case, then that's when you can disclose whatever information, again, is necessary. DCF doesn't need to know that, the client had an abortion 3 years ago with this person or something like that. Like, that's just not necessary. And information like that, even in a progress note, should just be referenced as being medical information, not anything more than that. When you can break confidentiality, I'm going to get to that in HIPAA in the next one with the releases of information. Same thing with privileged communication and mandated reporting. Protecting client self-esteem. So 4 main reasons clients feel mistreated. This is all really kind of basic stuff. I'm just going to kind of, I'm not really going to go right through that because you can just read through it. but make sure that you read the next one or you see the chapter 19 PowerPoint. Okay. All right. That was fun.